Guess what, guys? I am back in the States for another poker vlogging series. Only this time, I am in Denver, Colorado. So welcome back to the channel, guys. I am currently at Red Rocks Amphitheater, which is one of the most iconic landmarks in Denver. So the plan for this trip is going to be 10 weeks of poker. Going to be playing some 2-5 primarily at the Monarch Casino in Black Hawk. And for the last 2 weeks of my trip, I'm going to be doing a lot more traveling around the neighboring states, namely Utah, Wyoming, and Idaho. So if you like poker, you like traveling, you like mountains, you like awesome scenery, then follow me as I embark on one of my most epic adventures yet, right here in Colorado. So we are now in downtown Denver, and I've just finished lunch at the Cheesecake Factory. Man, I missed this place from the last time when I was there last year when I was in California. It's not always going to be chain restaurants for me on this trip, because tonight I'm planning on going to the oldest restaurant, I think. I don't know if it's the oldest restaurant or oldest steak restaurant. I think it's the oldest restaurant in Denver, which is the Buckhorn Exchange. The reason why I've chosen this place, it's not because of that reason. The reason why I want to go there is because it serves game. I think the first time I've tried game meat was when I was in Norway, and I really enjoyed it. So this place that I want to go tonight, I want to try elk for the first time. There is also another Denver specialty, which I'm not sure if I'm that keen on, and that's the Rocky Mountain oysters. For those of you who don't know what it is, it's not an oyster. It's these round balls, which are in fact bull testicles. Naturally, the sound of that doesn't really seem that appetizing to me. I'll reserve myself for now on whether or not I'm going to try this, but it's not looking good.
How you doing? Coming up for a drink? Okay, let's go hang out.
So right now we are on 16th Street Mall, which I think supposedly is one of the most famous streets in Denver, and that's because it's kind of packed with like all the bars and restaurants. So now we're just going to walk towards the Civic Center and the Capitol Hill, which I think is another one of the main attractions, I guess, in Denver. So we're going to check that out. There's also a really cool art museum, so I kind of want to check that out too. And I think by the time we've done that, we are then going to make our way over to Challenge Hill, where we can get some more sweeping views of the city. Right, so we've just arrived at Challenge Hill. So yeah, just trying to find a place where I can get quite a nice view of the scenery. Something not too strenuous, as we're going to be climbing a lot of mountains in the weeks to come. So this is just going to be our warm-up. Looking forward to getting to the top of this and seeing what the scenery looks like. And hopefully I'll be able to find a nice spot to talk about some poker. So we just did it. Steps are pretty steep, and the views pretty cool. Right guys, so I've just been chilling out here on top of Challenge Hill. To be fair, this has probably actually been my first opportunity to kind of just slow down and just chill out really, and just enjoy some of the scenery. Right, so I want to go over some of the poker that I've been playing over the past couple of weeks. There's a session that I want to go through, which happened, I think, about 3 days ago. So bearing in mind, we've been playing for 2 weeks now, and just like what I did back in California last year, I will be posting my results each week. But given I've not been able to film for like a week and a half, there will just be 9 weeks in this trip instead of 10. The casino that I've been playing at, which is called the Monarch Casino Resort and Spa in Black Hawk, is a really nice card room. It's just a really nice size. It just feels very intimate. The staff are amazing, the dealers are amazing, and the players are also very nice and friendly. And I just think that I'm just going to really enjoy playing here over the next 10 weeks. So the session that I want to talk through in this video was the session that we played on Monday earlier this week. So in this session, we arrived about 9 or 10 a.m. It was the very first 2-5 game that opened. We bought into this game for 2K, which is the max, and we begin this session 8-handed. Right, so in this first interesting hand, there is an open from early position to $15. There is then a call from middle position before it then folds all the way back to me in the big blinds, and I look down at ace jack of diamonds. So in this spot, I think sometimes we can squeeze, and sometimes I don't mind just flatting and going multi-way. In this occasion, I decide to continue with a flat call and go to a flop. And the flop comes ace 3-10 with 2 spades. I start with a check, and then early position then quickly decides to c-bet for just $15. Middle position then folds, and now the action's back on us. I think check calling here is the standard play, so that's what we decided to do. We decided to continue with a flat call. So we are now heads up to the turn, which comes another 10. So on this turn card, I think we do have a nice spot to lead here for small. However, as an exploit for this player pool, I just didn't feel like this would be the best play. So therefore I decided to check twice, and then villain then goes into the tank before double barreling for $35. Versus this sizing, I think the standard play is again to just check call. So that's what we decided to do. We decided to commit the chips and continue with a call. The river then comes an offsuit king. I think this is a really nice card for us, as it does now eliminate some ace-king combos from our opponent, and also means we now get to chop against hands such as ace-queen. So in this spot, given that our opponent does have the stronger ace-x hands, our hand does default to a check. So we decide to play a check for a third time. Villain now goes into the tank before he then assembles a bet and then throws in $85. This sizing to me doesn't really make too much sense. I think villain should be polarizing his range to miss draws and ace-king type hands. Had villain be putting in like a pot size or even an overbet, I think that would put us in a much tougher spot. However, as played, given a small bet sizing of $85, we don't think we have any decision here. So we decide to make the call, and villain says we're good. We show our hand and villain mucks. A special shout out to Elias, who was the villain in his hand, who's a really cool Mexican dude, and the first friend that I made in the card room. All right.
Thanks for my hold down.
Okay, so moving on to the next hand, I think an hour or 2 hours have now passed. The table dynamics have now shifted a little, as there is now who I think local poker pro who has now joined our table in seat 8. So in this hand, villain in C8 opens the pot to $25, and then it folds to us in middle late position, and we look down at ace queen offsuit. I decide to continue with just a flat call, and the rest of the table folds, so we are now going heads up to the flop. And the flop comes ace-king rainbow. Given perceived ranges, villain should be all over this board, so I would expect villain to be c-betting this flop at a high frequency. However, to my surprise, villain decides to play a check. Action now is on us, and in this spot, this flop should never really hit our range very well, so I decide to play my range and check back. So we are now off to the turn card, and the turn just comes like an offsuit 9. Villain now goes into the tank before he decides to check twice. I think as played, villain is now repping some kind of king X hand, like a king queen, king jack, or maybe some hand like pocket queens or pocket jacks or pocket tens. So in this spot, when the action checks to us, I think we definitely do want to go for some value here. However, I think we need to just be going for a small sizing here, as the hands that we do have beat, we pretty much have crushed. So I decided to put in a small bet of $20. Villain then thinks for a little while before then deciding on a call. So we're now going off to a river card, and I'm just praying not to see any queens or jacks or tens. Unfortunately, on the river, the dealer puts out an offsuit 7. Villain now checks for a third time, and I think we apply the same aforementioned logic on the turn. I think we definitely do want to go for another bet, and again, I think we should always be going for a small sizing here. So I decided to put out a small bet of just $40, but villain thinks for a while, but then unfortunately he decides to let it go. So we get to drag in a small pot here. You have pocket kings?
No, I was hoping ace 10, ace king.
Yeah, I had it.
Right?
Right, so the previous hand was quite a small pot, but the next hand is quite the opposite. In this next hand, there is a limp from under the gun, and then early position raises to $30. Action then folds to me in the hijack, and I look down at pocket 9s. So we decide to join the party with a flat call, and then button, small blind, big blind, and under the gun, make the call. So we are no less than 6 ways to the flop, and it comes Jack 6-5 rainbow. Under the gun checks, early position checks. We decide to also check, and the rest of the players also check. So we are now off to a free turn card, which comes an offsuit 9. Under the gun decides to check twice, but now the early position player decides to make a small stab here of $50. So in this spot, there are only really 2 hands that beat us here. So there's pocket jacks, which I think the only player that can really have this hand is early position. But then given the action on the flop and on the turn, would villain actually really check a hand like pocket jacks on the flop 6 ways and then just delay c-bet for like a third pot sizing? So given how the action went, I think pocket jacks is extremely unlikely, so I've kind of crossed that out. The only hand that we are really afraid of here is 7-8 for the nuts, and this is a hand that any of the other players left in this hand could very easily have. So when the action is now on us with a turn set, I think a raise here would be over-repping our hand, especially as we are still 6 ways. So in this spot, I think calling is the best play here. So we decide to make the call, button calls, small blind and big blind folds, and the under the gun also calls. So we are still 4 ways to the river card here, and the river comes an offsuit queen. Not my favorite card, as it does now also complete king 10 for the nuts, which also obviously has us now beat. Under the gun checks, early position also decides to check, and now the action's back on us. Given that there's only 1 more player left to act, and it's the player that holds position on all of us, I think if we check, it's pretty much always going to check through. As I think if we were beat and one of the players was trapping us, I think it would most likely be the under the gun and early position player and not the button, because I think given the action on the turn, I would expect the in position player to be raising 7-6. So I think the decision on the river here is not whether or not we should be betting. I think it's just a question of sizing. I don't think pot or overbet is the right play here, given the relative strength of our hand, and that at least one of the other players in the hand could quite easily have us beat. So having spent a little bit of time in the tank, I decide on a sizing of $175. Button quickly folds, under the gun also folds. However, early position now decides to go deep into the tank. So after going deep into the tank, villain now decides to raise, but he doesn't make it like a 3x or like a 4x raise. Nope, he decides to jam his whole stack in for like 1,500. If there was ever a situation to make it as easy as possible for me to make the fold, this would be it. To be honest, I don't really like this sizing from villain, because I really don't see this ever as a bluff. I think he is only targeting 1 hand for us to be calling him here with, which is 7-8 for the second nuts. So in this spot, given we only just have second set, I think we have a pretty easy fold here. So we decide to let go of our cards, and we're going to be losing this first big pot of the session.
Ace king of spades and flops like that.
Moving on to the next interesting hand. In this hand, there is an open from early position to $20, and then the action then folds to us in the small blind, and we look down at pocket kings. So we decide to put in the 3-bet to $80, and then big blind, who is a very tight, solid ABC type player, decides to snap call my 3-bet. Early position then tanks for a little while before also making the call. We are now going 3 ways to the flop, which comes 6-4-7 rainbow. I would expect villain in the big blind to be 4-betting aces 100% of the time. So given that she only just flattered, means that we do have the best hand pre-flop. And given the cold call, I've pretty much immediately put villain on queens plus and ace king plus. So on the flop here, I decided to take a little bit of time just to consider my options here and consider the best way to play against villain's range in the big blind. So villain did have a hand like ace king in the big blind, though I fully expect big blind to check. However, if the big blind had a hand like queens or maybe jacks, then I would expect her to bet if I decided to check. And given that this board should never really be good for us, and the only player that I'm actually concerned about is the player in early position, as he can pretty much have all the sets here, I decide to start with a check. Big blind then very quickly announces $200 and then puts in the chips. Action's now on early position, and I think in this spot I was pretty much praying for early position to fold, as I think early position's the only player in this hand that can have us beat. And fortunately for us, early position decides to fold, and so now the action's now back on us heads up. I think villain has about $1,000 left in her stack. I don't really see any reason to be check raising here, as I don't think we'll have any issues getting all the money in by the river card, and I don't think there are any really scare cards except for an ace. Having considered my options, I decided to continue with a flat call. So we are now heads up to the turn card, and the turn I think just comes like another 6. We continue to check twice, and then villain quickly decides to make another bet of $200. Given the size of the pot and given how much is left in villain's stack, I think this is the time to be springing the trap. I don't think we need to be trapping anymore. I think we can pretty easily get all the money in and fully expect us to get called by worse pocket pairs. I think villain's hand is pretty face up here. I don't think there's ever a bluff here, so I decide to go all in, and villain pretty much snap calls. We are now off to the river card, and I'm extremely happy that I decided to jam on the turn because the river comes an ace. I show my hand and villain shows pocket queens. So yeah, very, very happy with the way I played this hand, and we get to drag in a huge pot.
Yeah, because the straight looked like it was out.
And now we come on to what I think it was probably the most interesting hand of my 2-5 session. In this hand, there is an open from under the gun to $25. Hijack decides to call, and I look down in the cutoff with pocket 5s. So I decide to join the party with a flat call, button calls, and big blind also decides to call. We are now going 5 ways to the flop, which comes king, 5, 6, rainbow. Pretty sweet. Action is now on under the gun, and he decides to put in a very small c-bet of $25. Hijack quickly decides to make the fold, and now the action's on us. I don't see this bet as a bluff, especially given that he would be bluffing into 4 opponents. So the kind of range of hands that I'm putting villain on here would be aces, ace king, and king queen. Kind of hands that don't really need to bet too big here to kind of fold out pocket pairs that I've missed, and just to kind of thin out the field and get some thin value. I certainly wouldn't expect villain to play pocket kings this way, as I think pocket kings we probably want to be sizing up or either be check raising, or at least that's kind of what I feel like would be the optimal play here if I was in villain's shoes, having flopped a top set under the gun against 4 opponents. So in this spot here, given that we are still multi-way, I'm pretty happy to keep the other players behind me in the hand to build the pot. So I decide to continue with just a flat call, button calls, and big blind also calls. We are now going 4 ways to the turn card, which is not my favorite. It comes an offsuit 4, which now completes 7-8 for the nuts. So pretty similar to the pocket 9s hand that we had earlier in the session. On this turn card, under the gun does something quite unexpected, and he decides to now size up to $200. I don't expect villain to have 7-8 too often here. I think this turn card should be more favorable for the in-position players at a much higher frequency than the pre-flop aggressor. But even having said that, I think we only really have one option here, given that we still do have 2 players behind us who could quite easily have the nuts. I think raising would be over-repping a hand, and folding is certainly out of the question. So I think we have a pretty easy call here. So that's what we decided to do. We decided to continue with a flat call, big blind also calls. And so we are now off to the river card here, and I would love to see the board paired. Not only does the board pair, the river comes the last remaining 5 in the deck, giving us quads and the stone cold nuts. What an amazing feeling this is to have quads in such a big pot. Action's now on under the gun, and I'm obviously praying for villain to put in a big bet here, but sadly under the gun decides to check. So now the action's now on us with quads. Given my perception of player tendencies in this hand, I think if we were to bluff here, I don't think we would be jamming. If we were to bet like a near pot size bet, like $800, it would look super strong. And I think if I was to bluff, I would use this sizing. So after being in the tank, thinking all of this through, I decided to assemble a bet of $775, and I slide it into the pot. Button folds, big blind folds, and then the action's on early position who goes into the tank. So after being in the tank for a little while, villain eventually decides to call. So we show our hand, and of course villain sees the bad news, and so now we get to drag in a massive pot here in our 2-5 session.
Love with the red dot on it.
Very nice.
It was Kelly, I think.
It was Ashley.
Right, so now we come on to the final semi-interesting hand from my 2-5 session earlier this week. In this hand, there is the limp from under the gun, and then early position opens the pot to $15. The action then folds all the way to us on the button, and we look down at ace-9 of clubs. So in this spot, we're always either calling or raising here, never folding. And on this occasion, I decide to continue with a call. Small blind folds, big blind and under the gun also call. We are now going 4 ways to the flop, and it comes 8-8-4 with 2 clubs. Action checks to the early position player, who puts in a bet of $35. Given that we got the nut draw, I don't really mind letting other inferior draws continue in this hand. So we decide to continue with the flat call, but given what happens next with big blind and under the gun's action, you can completely disregard all of my analysis because big blind and under the gun snap fold. We are now heads up to the turn card, which comes the 6 of clubs. Early position wisely decides to slow down with a check, and now the action's on us. In game, when I saw villain check on the turn, I think it was a pretty honest reaction here that he didn't like the card and therefore he doesn't really have a strong hand. With this in mind, I decided to choose a sizing according to the strength of our opponent's hand, and I decided to put in a small bet of just $50. The villain seems a bit pained at this bet sizing, which is just a really good sign that we've made the right bet sizing. And after humming and hawing for a while, he reluctantly decides to continue with a call. We are now off to the river card, and the river comes like I think it was like a queen of clubs. Villain decides to snap check, and in this spot, I think the best way to make the most money here is to put villain on some kind of like a king of clubs type hand. If he was continuing the turn card with like ace king with the king of clubs, because I think in this spot, any river bets from us are pretty much unlikely to get called by anything other than a strong flush, in my opinion. So when villain checks, I decide to size up just a little bit to $125. Villain looks very pained, and after tanking for a little while, he decides to make the good fold. And we get to drag in this pot and end our 2-5 session.
I don't want to I haven't won it already.
Alright guys, so I've just finished my session playing the 2-5 at the Monarch Casino. Again, we had a really nice strong session today. We won a really big pot with the quad 5s. Just wondering if I may have lost a little bit of value by not overbetting the river there. It was the first time I played with that player in seat 1, and he seems like a very competent player and a good regular. So for the 2-5 game, there's also something called the rock game, which is only available in the 2-5 games. The rock game is essentially a winner's straddle, and the way that this straddle works in this card room is that action always begins under the gun. If there's been no raises when it gets to the straddler, then the action skips over the straddle, and then it keeps going round until there is a raise. And only when there's a raise, that's when the straddler then acts. And after that, it just plays just as normal. Mississippi straddle is also allowed as well. So that's essentially a straddle from any position. The player with the worst position, assuming there are 2 people that want to straddle, takes precedence. I think you're allowed to straddle up to $300 in a 2-5 game. And I think what's really, really great about the 2-5 game here is that you can buy in for 2,000. I think that's amazing, being able to buy in for 400 big blinds and play super deep stack. I'm really, really happy with that structure. Really suits my playing style, and good opportunities to play some big pots. So yeah, just going to drive home now, drive back down the mountain. So I've been here for about 2 weeks, right? And I still don't feel fully acclimatized. I still find it a little bit uncomfortable breathing. Yeah, it always feels like there's not enough air. I'm like over 8,000 feet right now, so still need a bit more time to acclimatize. So yeah, just gonna drive home now and make some dinner, do some laundry, you know, the usual exciting stuff, and I'll speak to you later. So this was a very, very strong session for us. I think we bought in the game for like 2.5K, and I think we cashed out for like just over $4,000, which means we ended the session with a profit of $1,757. So for the first week, we had a perfect week. We had straight winning sessions all week, and we ended the first week up I think just over $4,000. And this past week, i.e. week 2, we ended the week just over $5,000. So far, these first 2 weeks has been really, really insane. Really, really pleased with our results. I can just only hope that I can continue this grid run for the next 8 weeks and end my trip with a massive result. I think that's it for me now. I'm just going to be driving back to downtown, going to be going to the Buckhorn to get myself a well-deserved piece of elk steak. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed watching. Peace.